The laughter reached the human station 11 minutes before the fire did. It came as sound dressed up to look like sound, a wet, rolling noise. The devouring reach pushed across 40 light seconds of vacuum so that every species nearby would feel it in their teeth. The reach had no mouths the way smaller things had mouths. It had 100,000 of them, and when it laughed it used all of them at once. Sub-Coordinator Eshk of the Bound Tally heard it from the observation ring of the watch platform 9th Vale, and his 3 hearts did the thing they always did when the reach drew near. They tried to stop. They tried to be small and quiet and not worth eating. Eshk was not a soldier. He was a counter. His whole life had been spent tallying ships, hulls, weapons, and worlds, writing the numbers into the great shared ledger that the lesser empires kept so the reach would know what it was owed. Today his ledger had 1 human station in it. 1. The station was called Tarn Reach Yard. It was a building site, a half-finished ring of dock arms and gray scaffolding, orbiting a dead orange star, where the humans had been quietly assembling warships for 200 years, without asking anyone's permission. It had 410 workers aboard. It had no fleet. It had 1 warship still bolted into its largest cradle, unpainted, unnamed on the registry, a long gray blade of a thing that had not yet flown. Against it came the devouring reach. 12,000 living hulls, each one a grown thing, not built, a shell of black chitin around a churn of hunger, swimming through the dark in a tide that blotted out the orange star. Eshk counted them, because counting was what he did. 12,040. He counted the human station's guns. 41. Most of them point defense, half of them not yet installed. The arithmetic was the whole story. The reach knew it. That was why it was laughing. The voice that came through to the lesser platforms was not the reach's true voice, which would have unmade Eshk's mind to hear. It was a translation, smoothed and thinned for small ears. A perch, the reach said, and the word dripped. A nest of soft, warm things on a perch. We will open the perch and pour you out, and you will be part of us by the next turning of your little star. This is not a war, this is a feeding. Lesser servants of the Bound Tally, you may watch. Learn what becoming us looks like. Learn it well. Your worlds are next on the menu, and we want you grateful. Eshk wrote it down. Feeding, not war. He wrote that too. His stylus shook against the ledger plate. On the other platforms, the other counters of the other beaten species laughed along with the reach. They had to. The reach could hear silence, and silence sounded like defiance, and defiance it ate first. So they laughed at the little human station. 410 soft, warm things on a perch, and the noise of all their fear pretending to be cruelty, rolled out across the dark toward Tarn Reach Yard. Inside Tarn Reach Yard, a woman named Mara Holt was on her knees, inside a gun mount with a torque driver, swearing at a bolt. She was not a captain. She was a fitter, 3rd grade hull and ordnance division, and she had been awake for 31 hours because the number 11 dorsal mount had been throwing a fault all shift, and she would be damned before she signed it off broken. Mara was 44 years old. She had short gray-streaked hair and burn scars on both forearms from a coolant flash 6 years back, and a voice that could cut steel plate. She had been born on this station. That was the thing the galaxy did not know about Tarn Reach Yard, the thing none of the watching platforms had ever bothered to learn. It was not a military base. It was not a garrison. It was a town. 410 people lived here, and most of them had grown up here, in the long, quiet generations, since the first humans had set the first dock arm spinning around the dead orange star, and they had children here, and gardens in the hydroponics ring, and a small, loud school where the youngest of them learned to read by the light of the same work lamps their parents welded under. They built warships, yes. They had always built warships. But they built them the way a careful family keeps a loaded weapon high on a shelf in a house full of children. Out of love, out of fear, out of the deep, stubborn refusal to ever be the kind of people that something could simply come and take. Mara had welded plate on 11 ships in her life. She had never once watched any of them fire a shot in anger. She had hoped, the way her mother had hoped, and her mother's mother, to live her whole life and die in her bed having never seen the shelf come down. The Reach had other plans. The alarm that ran through the station was not a battle alarm. Tarn Reach Yard did not have a battle alarm, because Tarn Reach Yard was not supposed to ever be in a battle. It was a shipyard, It had a fire alarm and a decompression alarm, and a "here comes a supply barge" chime, and the sound that came over the speakers now was a confused blend of all three, because the duty officer in the control spine had never in his life had to invent a noise for 12,000 living warships coming over the horizon. Mara put her head out of the gun mount. "What is that?" "Holt." The voice in her ear was Dev Arno, Ordnance Chief, her boss, a heavy, quiet man 2 decks down. "Holt, you need to get the 11 mount live. Right now. Whatever it's doing, I need it shooting in 10 minutes. "It's throwing a feed fault, Dev. I can't just—" 12,000 contacts, Mara. His voice did not rise. That was the thing that frightened her, that it did not rise. 12,000. The reach. They're 40 minutes out and they are not slowing down. The yard director already sent the surrender ask. Mara sat back on her heels inside the cold metal throat of the gun. 40 minutes. 12,000. The reach. Everyone in the inhabited dark knew about the devouring reach. It was the thing the lesser empires paid tribute to, so it would eat someone else. It was the tide that turned worlds into more of itself. You did not fight the reach. 40 navies had tried over the centuries, and 40 navies had been digested into its hulls and now swam in it, screaming, part of the laugh. "They sent the surrender ask," Mara repeated. "They did," Dev said, and the reach laughed at it. Wouldn't even take it. Said it wasn't a war. It was a feeding. A pause. Directors gone quiet. Spine commands gone quiet. So I'm telling you, fitter to fitter, get the gun live. Because the only thing in this yard that can shoot back is the ship in Cradle 1, and the ship in Cradle 1 isn't finished, and the only people left who know how to finish it are us. Mara looked down the long curving spine of the station, past the dock arms and the work lights, to Cradle 1, to the long gray blade of a ship that had no name yet. Its reactor was lit. Its guns were racked but cold. Its crew was a skeleton of 40 fitters and engineers who had been building it, not flying it. She keyed her mic. "Dev, that ship's not crewed. It's not commissioned. It doesn't even have a name." "No," Dev agreed. "It doesn't." The reach laughed again, out in the dark, all 100,000 mouths, and the laugh was so loud now it made the work lights flicker. "So let's give it one," Dev said. "And let's give it teeth, and let's see how funny they think we are in about 40 minutes. Mara Holt looked at the broken bolt in her hand. Then she put down the torque driver, picked up the impact wrench, and got back to work on the gun. Out on the watch platform 9th Vale, Sub-Coordinator Esh kept counting, because the counting was the only thing holding his mind in one piece. He counted the docking lights on the human station that were still lit. He counted the ones going dark as the workers there, presumably, fled inward toward the core, where the soft, warm things felt safest. He counted the minutes. The other counters around him had stopped laughing. The reach had gone quiet, and in the quiet, they had run out of cruelty to borrow. Now they only watched, 12 species of beaten clerk pressed to the windows of their watch platforms, here, because the reach had ordered them to be here. The reach liked an audience for its feedings. A feeding was a lesson. The lesson was always the same, and the lesson was, there is no point. Esh had watched the reach digest a world before. He had counted that world too. 40 billion living things on a green planet called Sume, gone in 11 days. The planet itself left a hollow rind. The population now swimming somewhere in the black tide as part of the laugh. He had written the number 40 billion into the ledger, and then he had gone to a small room and been sick, which was not a thing his species was supposed to do over numbers. He did not expect today to be different. A station was so much smaller than a world. 410 warm things on a perch. It would not even take the reach 11 days. It would take an afternoon. And yet, Ishq was a good counter, and a good counter notices when the arithmetic stops behaving. He had noticed something the reach, in its certainty, had not bothered to. The human station was not running. The docking lights going dark were not workers fleeing toward the core. The pattern was wrong for fleeing. The lights were going dark in a sequence, arm by arm, the way a thing goes dark when it is shutting down systems it does not need, so it can pour everything it has into the systems it does. A fleeing animal does not do that. A fleeing animal runs. Esh leaned closer to his ledger plate, and for the first time in many years, he stopped writing the number he expected to write, and waited to see the number that was actually coming. Below him, sealed in the cold throat of an unfinished gun on a station the whole galaxy had already written off. Mara Holt set the impact wrench against the seized bolt, braced her boots against the mount, and leaned into it with everything she had. The bolt screamed and gave. "Dev," she said into her mic, breathing hard, wiping grease across her brow. 11 mounts coming live. Tell the spine to hold the firing circuit open. And Dev. She looked again down the long gray length of the unnamed ship in Cradle 1, lit from within, waiting. Whatever we're calling that ship, make it something they'll remember. There was a short silence on the channel. "I've got a name," Dev Arno said. "But you're not going to like how much work it's going to be to earn it." The Reach crossed the 40-light-second line. The work lights of Tarn Reach Yard flickered one last time, steadied, and burned. And 410 human beings, on a perch, with one unfinished ship and 41 guns, against 12,040 living hulls, rolled up their sleeves and got ready to teach the galaxy a number it had never learned to count. The name Dev Arno had chosen was Quiet Furnace, and Mara understood it the moment she saw it stenciled, fast and crooked, on the prow by a fitter with a spray gun and shaking hands. A furnace did not roar to announce itself. A furnace sat quiet and gray and unremarkable in the corner of a workshop, and you forgot it was there, right up until the moment you opened it and it took the skin off your face. The humans of Tarn Reach Yard had been building quiet furnaces in this orbit for 200 years. They had simply never had a reason to open one in front of company. There were 40 of them left aboard the ship, 40 engineers, fitters, and yard hands, no commissioned officers among them, because the officers had been on the station spine, and the station spine had gone quiet and would stay quiet. Dev Arno was the most senior person on the quiet furnace by virtue of being ordnance chief, and Dev Arno had never commanded a ship in his life. He had built 31 of them. He said that was close enough. "Listen up," he said, and his voice came through the ship's internal channel to every one of them, in the gun mounts and the reactor spaces, and the long cold spine of the hull. "I'm not going to lie to you, because you'd know I was lying. You built half the lie detectors on this rig. We are 40 people on a ship that isn't finished, and there are 12,000 of them, and the galaxy out there is watching us on every platform they've got, and they are watching us because they are sure we are about to die." A silence. Somewhere a coolant pump ticked over. "Here's the thing they don't know," Dev said. "They've been watching the Reach eat people for 1,000 years. Navies, empires, worlds, and every single one of those navies made the same mistake. They treated the Reach like a fleet. They tried to fight 12,000 ships. You can't fight 12,000 ships. There aren't enough guns in the dark to fight 12,000 ships." Mara, racking the last shell into the 11 mounts feed, found herself listening the way you listen when a thing is true. "But the Reach isn't a fleet," Dev said. "I've spent 30 years putting steel together, and I know a built thing from a grown thing, and the Reach is grown. It's one animal, 12,000 hulls, and they all share one hunger. And a thing that shares one hunger shares one nervous system. And a nervous system has a spine. And a spine has a place where everything passes through. We're a shipyard. We are very, very good at finding the one bolt that holds the whole frame together. So we are not going to fight 12,000 ships." He let it land. "We are going to find their bolt, and we are going to break it. Holt. Status on the guns." Mara wiped her hands. 38 mounts live and feeding. 3 I can't fix in the time we've got. Main spinal driver is racked and cold, but it's never been test-fired, Dev. You understand me. That gun has never once been fired. If it's machined wrong, it's going to come apart and take the bow with it." "Then it's a good thing the person who machined it is aboard," Dev said. "Wasn't it you?" "It was me." "Then I trust the gun. Light it." Mara looked at the cold spinal driver on her board, the great gun that ran a third of the length of the ship, the gun she had ground and bored and trued over 4 months with her own hands and her own tools, because the spinal driver was the one part of any warship that the yard never trusted to anyone but its best fitter, and the yard's best fitter, on the quiet furnace, was her. She had built it perfect. She knew she had built it perfect. The trouble was that perfect on the bench and perfect under a full reactor charge it had never carried were 2 different kinds of perfect, and only one of them had ever been tested, and it was not the one that mattered. "If I light it and I'm wrong," she said quietly. "You're not wrong," Dev said. "But if you were, I'd rather find out reaching for the heart of the thing that ate Sume than find out cowering in a corner, waiting to get poured out. Wouldn't you? Mara was quiet for a moment. Then, despite everything, she smiled. A small, grim thing inside the cold throat of a gun. Yeah, she said. Yeah, I would. Lighting the driver. Out in the dark, the devouring reach reached the station. It did not come as a line of ships. It came as weather, a black tide of living hulls, each one a wet gleaming shell 200 body lengths long, swimming on jets of burning gut gas, and where they passed the orange starlight bent around them, so that they seemed to drag the dark along behind them like a cloak. The leading edge of the tide spread to swallow Tarn Reach Yard from every angle at once, the way a mouth closes, and the laugh rolled out ahead of it. All 100,000 throats, so loud now that loose tools on the station floated up off their racks and rang. On the watch platform 9th Vale, Sub-Coordinator Eshkeg gripped his ledger plate and made himself watch. This was the moment. This was always the moment in a feeding, the moment the prey understood. He had seen it on 100 faces of 100 species, the eyes going wide, the bodies going still, the small frantic broadcasts begging the reach for terms it would never give. He braced himself to count the human station's last transmissions, to write down their begging, because that was his job, to record exactly how each thing ended so the ledger would be complete. The human station transmitted. It was not begging. It was a single voice, a man's voice, flat and tired and amused, and it was not addressed to the reach. It was addressed to everyone, to all the watch platforms, to all the beaten counters at all their windows, to the whole audience the reach had so carefully gathered. This is Tarn Reach Yard, the human said. We got your surrender form. We're not going to fill it out. I know you all came to watch us get eaten. I want you to stay. I want every one of you to stay and watch, all the way to the end, because in about 4 minutes, the thing you've been paying tribute to for 1,000 years is going to learn what the inside of a furnace feels like, and I do not want any of you to miss it. Eshk's stylus hovered, frozen, over the ledger. You're all laughing, the human voice went on, conversational, almost kind. I get it. The math is funny. 40 of us, 12,000 of them, hilarious. So go ahead, laugh, get it all out now. A pause. Eshk could hear the human smile in the silence. Because we are about to laugh back, and the way we laugh is loud. The devouring reach closed its mouth on Tarn Reach Yard, and the quiet furnace came off its cradle. It did not launch the way a ship launches, in a long, graceful arc out of dock. It came straight up off the cradle on a column of reactor light so violent that the cradle itself melted to slag behind it, and it drove bow first into the leading edge of the black tide before the tide could finish closing, and every one of its 38 live mounts opened fire at once. Mara Holt, strapped into the 11 mount with her hands on the manual override because the auto track was still glitching, watched her gun's first shells go out into the dark and hit a living hull, and she watched the living hull come apart. It did not come apart the way a built ship comes apart, in tumbling plates and venting air. It came apart the way meat comes apart. The chitin shell split, and inside it was not engine and crew. It was a churning, wet mass of digesting matter, half-dissolved fragments of the ships and creatures the Reach had eaten over 1,000 years. And that wet mass blew out into the cold, and froze and shattered, and the hull around it went dark and dead, and began, slowly, to drift. It bleeds, Mara breathed. Dev, it bleeds. Everything that eats can bleed, Dev's voice came back. Keep shooting. Aim for the seams between the plates. That's where the shell's thin. Don't waste a shot on the armored noses. You'll just scratch them and make them angry. We're not here to kill 12,000. Remember the plan. We are here to make a road. A road. Mara understood now what the plan was, and her stomach turned over with the size of it. The quiet furnace was not trying to win a battle against the whole Reach. It was trying to drive through it, to carve a tunnel through the living tide, hull by bleeding hull, and reach the thing at the center. Because Dev Arno was right. A grown thing had a spine, and a spine had a heart, and somewhere in the dark heart of 12,000 mouths was the one mass that all the others fed, the one hunger they all served, the bolt that held the whole monstrous frame together. And the only way to it was through. Mara had heard, all her life, the way the old hands talked about the reach. They talked about it the way you talk about weather, or death, or the dark between stars. A thing that simply was. A thing you built your whole life around without ever expecting to change it. Her grandmother had told her, when she was small, that the dark belonged to the reach, and the only thing a person could do was build good ships, and keep their head down, and pray the tide chose some other perch. Mara had believed that for 44 years. She did not believe it anymore. She had just watched a living hull of the unkillable thing split open and bleed out into the cold, because she, Mara Holt, fitter 3rd grade, had put a shell into its seam. The dark did not belong to the reach. The dark had only ever belonged to whoever was willing to find the thin place and put steel into it. And the humans of Tarn Reach Yard had spent 200 quiet years learning to find the thin place in anything. "Keep us moving inward, Helm," Dev said. "Don't let them slow us. The moment we stop, they pile on. And a thing that's stopped is a thing that gets eaten. We don't stop. We've never stopped. Forward. Always forward, toward the heart." The tide closed on the quiet furnace from all sides. Living hulls slammed into its flanks, not firing weapons, because the Reach did not fight with weapons. The Reach fought by engulfing, by wrapping prey in its mouths and pouring digestion over it until prey became Reach. 3 hulls fastened onto the quiet furnace's starboard side, and Mara felt the whole ship lurch, and heard, through the hull, a sound like rain, a sound like acid hissing on steel. "Hull breach risk. Sections 9 through 14, called a fitter, named Priya Sen, from the damage board, her voice tight. "They're trying to eat through the plating. Dev, the plating's holding, but I don't know for how long. This hull was rated for hard vacuum, not for getting chewed." "Holt," Dev's voice. "11 mount can bear on the starboard cluster. Burn them off us." Mara hauled the gun around on manual, the mount whining, and brought the 3 feeding hulls into her sight. They were so close she could see the texture of the chitin, the wet pulsing veins of gut gas under the shell. She fired into the seam where the nearest one had fastened itself to her ship, and the shell punched through, and the hull convulsed and let go, and the digesting mass inside it sprayed out across the dark and froze. 2 left. She fired again. 1 left. She fired again, and the impact wrench she had been swearing at 31 hours ago floated past her face inside the mount, knocked loose by the recoil, and she let it go, and she fired again, and the starboard side was clear. "Clear," she gasped. "Starboard clear." "Good," Dev said. "Now do it again, because here they come." They came in waves after that, and Mara stopped counting the hulls because there was no point in counting the hulls. There were always more hulls. She counted seams instead. That was the only number that mattered now. The soft line where 2 plates of chitin met and the shell went thin, and she taught her hands to find it without thinking, to lead the moving hull just enough, to put the shell into the seam, and watch the wet mass blow out and freeze. Find the seam, fire. Find the next seam, fire. The mount got so hot the paint blistered off the inside of it. She did not notice. "Talk to me, people," Dev said, on the open channel, calm as a man walking a deck on an ordinary shift. "Sen, give me damage." "Sections 9 through 14, breached but sealed," Priya Sen called back from the damage board. "We've got 3 crews down, no casualties yet. The bulkheads are holding. They keep fastening on and trying to chew, Dev. And the plating's holding, but every one that fastens on costs us a gun to burn off." "Then we burn them off," Dev said. "Reactor, talk to me." "Reactor's good," said a deep voice from the heart of the ship. A man named Saul Okafor, who had spent 11 years on this reactor and loved it like a child. "She's running hot, but she's running true. You want the spinal driver? You'll have it. I'll give you every jewel she's got, and then I'll give you some she doesn't have. Don't you worry about my reactor, Chief. You worry about the gun." A ragged laugh went around the channel. It was a strange thing, Mara thought, in the middle of a hull full of acid and breached sections and dead quiet damage crews, that 40 frightened people could still laugh, but that was the shed. That had always been the shed. You laughed because the alternative was to stop, and you could not stop. The quiet furnace drove on, deeper into the tide, and the tunnel of frozen gore behind it grew longer, and the watching platforms grew quieter, and out in the dark the devouring reach, which had not been hurt in 1,000 years, began for the very first time to be hurt. On the watch platform, Eshk had stopped breathing entirely. He was a counter. He could not help being a counter. And what he was counting now did not make sense. He was counting the Reach's dead. The Reach did not have dead. That was the first principle of the Reach. The Reach was the thing that made dead out of everything else, and never paid any of it back. In 1,000 years of tribute ledgers, no clerk had ever written a number in the Reach's casualty column, because the column had never been used, because it had never been needed. Eshk was writing in it now, 40, 60, 90, 110 dead hulls drifting dark in the wake of the one gray human ship that was driving like a blade into the body of the tide, leaving a tunnel of frozen gore behind it, and the tunnel was getting longer. "It's not fleeing," said the counter beside him, an old methane breather from a beaten reef world, her voice a thin whistle of disbelief. "Why is it not fleeing? It should be fleeing. It should be dead. Why is it going in?" Eshk looked at the numbers on his plate. He looked at the human ship. "Because it's not trying to get away," he said slowly. "It's trying to get to something." He pulled up the structural scan of the Reach, the great map of the tide that the bound tally kept for tribute purposes, and he looked at it the way he had never let himself look at it before, not as a wall, as a body. And he saw for the first time that the old methane breather counters had been right about one thing in all their whispered legends. The Reach did have a center, a vast dark mass at the heart of the tide, 10 times the size of any single hull, surrounded by its biggest and oldest shells, never moving, never feeding, only ruling. The maw within the maw, the one hunger that all the others were. And the gray human ship was driving straight toward it. "It can't reach the center," whistled Emor. "Nothing reaches the center. The center is buried in 10,000 hulls." "Watch," said Eshk, and he found that his voice had stopped shaking. "I think we are about to see something no ledger has ever recorded. I think we are about to need that empty column." The old methane breather counter pulled herself closer to the window, her tendrils gone still. Her name was Emor, and she was older than Eshk by 100 years, and she had been counting tribute for the Reach since before Eshk was hatched, and in all that time, she had written one number over and over, how much each beaten world owed, and how much it had paid, and how much it had left to lose. She had never once written a number for the Reach itself, because the Reach did not lose. That was the first law of her whole working life. The Reach did not lose. "In my youth," Emor whistled, very softly, so that only Eshk could hear, "there were stories, on my reef, of a far place at the edge of the chart where soft, warm things lived who would not pay the Reach, and who the Reach did not eat, though no one knew why. We were told the stories were lies. We were told they were comfort tales, the kind small ones tell each other in the dark, so the dark feels smaller. I have believed for 200 years that they were lies." She watched the gray human ship carve another hull open, watched the wet mass freeze and the shell go dark. "I do not think they were lies," Emor whistled. "I think the far place was simply waiting. I think it has been waiting a very long time for someone to be foolish enough to come to its perch and laugh." Eshk wrote that down too. Not the number, the thing she said. He wrote it in the margin of the ledger, in small, careful marks, because it felt true, and because if this was the day the dark changed, he wanted there to be a record of the moment an old counter first let herself believe. The Reach, for the first time in 1,000 years, stopped laughing. The silence of it was enormous. The 100,000 throats fell quiet all at once, and across the watching platforms the beaten clerks of 12 species felt the change and went cold, because they had never heard the Reach be quiet, and a thing that is always loud going quiet is a more terrible sound than any scream. The translated voice came again, and the smoothness was gone from it. It came rough, fast, urgent, a thing that had just understood it could be hurt. "Stop," the Reach said. "Stop, little warm thing. You will stop. You are nothing. You are 40 soft things on a broken hull. You cannot reach me. I am 10,000 years of eating. I am every navy that ever tried this, and every navy is part of me now and screaming, and you will be screaming too. You will be part of the laugh. You will." "Yeah," said the human voice, cutting across it, that same tired, amused flatness, and now Eshk knew the name of the man it belonged to, because the man said it. "This is Dev Arno, on the warship Quiet Furnace. We heard you the first time, 40 of us, 12,000 of you. Real funny. A pause. The quiet furnace drove deeper. I told you we were going to laugh back. Holt, light the spinal driver. Inside the quiet furnace, deep in the bow, the great gun that had never once been fired, the gun Mara Holt had machined with her own hands, and was not sure was machined right, began to charge. The reactor light dimmed across the whole ship as power poured forward into the driver. The lights in the gun mounts went amber. The coolant pumps screamed, and Mara Holt, watching the charge climb on her board toward a number no test had ever taken it to, found that she was not afraid of the gun coming apart anymore. She was afraid it might not be enough. Dev, she said quietly, just to him, on the private channel. If I'm wrong about the machining, if it comes apart, then it comes apart taking 1,000 of them with it, and the galaxy still saw us go straight at the heart of the thing they all knelt to, Dev said, just as quietly. But you're not wrong, Mara. I've watched you work for 15 years. You don't make things that come apart. You make furnaces. A breath. Open it. The quiet furnace broke through the last ring of old shells around the heart of the reach, and the maw within the maw lay open before it, vast and dark and pulsing, a mountain of hunger that had eaten 40 billion souls off a world called Sume, and laughed while it did, and Mara Holt put both hands on the manual override of a gun she had built with her own 2 scarred hands, took a breath, and gave the galaxy the loudest answer it had ever heard. The spinal driver fired. The shot was not a beam, and it was not a shell. It was a slug of dense metal, the length of a shuttle, thrown from the bow of the quiet furnace, at a speed that turned the dark between the ship and the heart of the reach into a single white line, and when it struck the maw within the maw, it did not explode. It went in. It punched through the front face of the great central mass, and kept going, through layer after layer of ancient digesting flesh, 10,000 years of stolen ships and stolen worlds packed into one dark mountain, and it did not slow, because Mara Holt had machined the gun right, and the gun had thrown the slug true. The slug passed all the way through the heart of the devouring reach, and out the far side and away into the dark, and behind it, through the whole length of the central mass, it left a tunnel of ruin. The reach screamed. It was not the laugh anymore. The laugh had been a sound the reach made to make others afraid. This was a sound the reach made because it was afraid, and across 40 light seconds of vacuum, the beaten counters on the watch platforms clapped their hands and tendrils and feeding cilia over whatever they heard, and still could not shut it out, because the scream came in through their teeth and their bones and the floors under their feet. On the 9th Veil, Subcoordinator Eshk did not cover whatever he heard with. He stood at the window, and he watched the heart of the thing that had eaten Sume convulse around a tunnel of ruin, and a feeling moved through him that he had no number for and no word for, a feeling he had not felt in so long he had forgotten his species could feel it, and he realized after a moment that it was hope. "One shot," whistled Amur, the old methane breather counter beside him, her tendrils slack. "It hurt the heart with one shot, but it is still alive. Look, it closes the wound. It is too big to kill with one shot. Nothing is big enough to kill it with shots." All around the watch platform, the other counters had pressed to the windows now, the whole shift of them, a dozen beaten clerks who had spent their lives writing tribute numbers and had never once seen the column they were writing in to bleed back. On every platform across the dark it was the same. 12 species of accountant, summoned to witness a lesson, leaning into the glass to watch the lesson go wrong. Some of them were broadcasting frightened questions to their home worlds. Some of them had simply gone silent. And a few of them, here and there, had begun, very quietly, where no master could hear, to make a sound that none of their species had been allowed to make in 1,000 years. A small sound that was almost, not quite, but almost, the sound of a thing daring to hope. She was right. Even as Eshk watched, the central mass was drawing itself in around the wound, the way a wounded animal curls around a hurt, and the 12,000 outer hulls were turning, all of them at once, all that shared hunger swinging around to point inward, toward the one gray ship that had hurt their heart. The tide that had been a wall was becoming a fist. It was going to close on the quiet furnace from every direction, and crush it and pour itself into the wound the ship had made, and eat the ship that had dared. "It's going to take it," whistled the methane breather, and the hope drained out of Eshk as fast as it had come. It hurt the Reach more than anything has ever hurt the Reach. And now the Reach is going to eat it, and it will all be for nothing, and the column will be erased, and we will be told it never happened. Eshk looked at the closing fist of 12,000 hulls. He looked at the one gray ship in the middle of it. And he heard, again, the human voice come across the dark, and the human voice was laughing. Not the way the Reach laughed. The Reach had laughed to make others small. The human laughed the way a person laughs at the top of a long, hard climb, when they finally see that the thing they came to do is going to work. Did you feel that? Dev Arno said. To the Reach, to the platforms, to the whole quiet dark. That was one shot, from one gun, that we built in a shed, while you were laughing. A breath. Now, you felt how that one went straight through. You felt how it didn't stop. You want to know why it didn't stop? Inside the quiet furnace, Mara Holt was already moving, hands flying across the feed controls, because she knew exactly why it hadn't stopped. She had loaded it, and she knew what came next. It didn't stop, Dev said, because we didn't load it to blow up. We loaded it to drill, to make a hole all the way through, to make a road. And the thing about a road, you great hungry mountain, is that a road is for traveling. Inside the quiet furnace, the second round was already in the breach. Mara had loaded it herself, by hand, because the autoloader for the spinal driver had never been finished, and she did not trust a thing that had never been finished to feed the most important shot of her life. The round was heavier than the drill round, and it was a different shape, fatter, blunter, and it had taken two of them to wrestle it into the breach, her and a young fitter named Cass Verrill, who had been an apprentice 8 months ago, and was now feeding a god-killing gun with his bare hands. That's it, Mara said, sealing the breach. That's the last open round we've got rigged. Cass, get clear of the recoil path. When this thing goes, the bow's going to flex like a struck spring, and I don't want you anywhere near the mount. I want to see it go in, Cass said. You'll feel it go in, Mara said. Trust me. Now move. He moved. Mara put her hands on the override. Driver's recharging, Mara called. 60%. 80. Dev, the second round's a different load. This one's not a drill. This one's set to open. You understand me. If I put this through the tunnel, the first one cut. Then it opens inside the heart, Dev finished, where the shell can't protect it, where 10,000 years of everything it ever ate is packed in tight with nowhere to go. His voice was very steady. Light it, Mara. Send it down the road. The fist of 12,000 hulls closed on the quiet furnace, and the quiet furnace fired its second shot a half-second before the fist could shut. The second slug went down the tunnel the first one had drilled, straight into the wounded heart of the devouring Reach, into the center of the dark mountain, and there, deep inside, where there was no shell and no armor and no room, it opened. It was not an explosion the way the dark had ever seen an explosion. The quiet furnace was a warship built by people who built warships for a living, in a shed at the edge of the Empire, and they had spent 200 quiet years learning exactly how to make a thing come apart, and they had put all of that quiet knowledge into the second round, and the second round did its quiet work in the one place the Reach could not protect. The heart of the devouring Reach lit up from the inside. Light poured out through the tunnel the first shot had cut. Light poured out through every seam and joint of the great central mass. The mountain of 10,000 years of hunger swelled and split and came apart, and 10,000 years of stolen ships and stolen worlds and stolen souls blew outward into the cold all at once, and froze, and were finally, after so long, still. And the 12,000 outer hulls, the fist that had been closing on the quiet furnace, all went dark in the same instant. Because they had shared one hunger, and the hunger was dead. Eshk watched 12,000 living warships become 12,000 drifting shells in the space of a single breath. The fist that had been closing on the gray human ship simply stopped, opened, fell still, and began to drift, all of it, all at once, a tide that had been weather, becoming a field of dark dead stone. And in the middle of it, scarred and venting and scorched along one whole flank where 3 hulls had tried to eat through it, the quiet furnace drifted out of the wreckage of the thing it had killed, under its own power, lights still burning, guns still hot. The silence on the watch platforms was total. 1,000 years, 12 species of beaten clerk, 40 navies digested, 40 billion souls off a single green world. A wall the whole inhabited dark had knelt to and paid, and called a god, because calling it a god was easier than admitting they had simply given up, and it was gone. It had taken one unfinished ship, 40 fitters, and an afternoon. Eshk looked down at his ledger plate, at the casualty column for the devouring reach, the column that had been empty for 1,000 years. He wrote in it, 12,040, all of them, the whole reach. Then he set down his stylus, and he did a thing that no sub-coordinator of the bound tally had ever done at a feeding, a thing that would have gotten him erased if there were still anyone left with the power to erase him. He keyed his platform's transmitter, and he sent, on the open channel, where all the platforms and the human ship could hear, 4 words. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." And around him, one by one, on platform after platform, the beaten counters of 12 broken species heard him do it, and were not erased, and understood that there was no longer anyone left to erase them, and they keyed their own transmitters, and the open channel filled, slowly at first and then all at once, with the sound of 12 species that had not made a free sound in 1,000 years, all saying thank you, all saying it to one scorched gray ship drifting in a field of dead stone. The human voice came back across the dark, and it was tired, and it was kind, and it was not laughing anymore. "You're welcome," Dev Arno said. "Now go home, all of you. Go home and tell them what you saw. Tell them the math. 40 of us, 12,000 of it, a breath, and tell them that the next thing that comes for any of you, you don't pay it, and you don't kneel to it, and you don't laugh along while it eats your neighbor. You call us. We're at Tarn Reach Yard. We build ships." A pause, and the dry edge came back into his voice. Just a little. "Apparently we're pretty good at it." Inside the quiet furnace, in the long gray spine of the ship, 40 exhausted human beings sat in their stations and listened to 12 broken species say thank you, and for a while, none of them could speak at all. Cass Varel, the apprentice who had fed the open round into the breach with his bare hands, 8 months out of his training, was the first to break the silence, and he did it by laughing, a young helpless laugh that had crying tangled all the way through it. "We killed it," he said. "Mara, Chief. We killed the Reach, us, in this. With a gun we built in a shed." His voice cracked. "My dad's going to lose his mind. He told me I'd never amount to anything bolting plate. He's going to lose his actual mind." "Tell him you reloaded the gun that killed a god, son," said Saul Okafor's deep voice from the reactor, warm and tired. "See what he says to that." And the channel, which had been so quiet, filled up slowly with the small, ragged sounds of 40 people who had been awake for a day and a half and had just done the impossible and had not yet had a single moment to feel any of it. Some of them laughed. Some of them wept. Priyasen, at the damage board, read out the long list of breached sections and burned-out mounts and chewed plating in a flat, steady voice, because someone had to take the count of what the ship had cost itself, and she finished by saying the one number that mattered most to all of them, that 40 had gone into the tide, and 40 were still alive, not one of them lost, and the channel went quiet again to hear it, and then it filled with a rough, relieved cheer that lasted longer than it should have, because they had earned every second of it. On the quiet furnace, Mara Holt sat back from the gun she had built, the gun that had not come apart, the gun that had reached all the way to the heart of the thing the galaxy knelt to, and she put her grease-black hands over her face, and she shook, once, hard, and then she made herself stop. "Holt," Dev's voice, private channel, just for her. "You still with me?" "I'm here," she said. "Dev, we did it. It's dead. We did," he said. And then, gently, "It's not over, though. I need you to hear me. It's not over." Mara took her hands away from her face. "What do you mean it's not over? It's dead. 12,000 hulls. They're all dead. The whole thing's—" "The Reach is dead," Dev agreed. "But the Reach didn't pay tribute to anybody, Mara. The Reach was the top of the chain, and things that sit at the top of the chain have friends, have masters, have people who set them loose on purpose, on the worlds they wanted softened up." His voice was quiet. Somebody fed the Reach for 1,000 years. Somebody pointed it. And right now, on platforms all across this dark, 12 species just watched 40 people in a shed Kill the unkillable thing in an afternoon. The people who owned the Reach are watching too, and they are doing exactly what you'd do if your guard dog just got put down by the gardener. Mara felt the cold come back into her chest. They're sending the rest. They're sending the rest, Dev said. Get the 11 mount reloaded, Fitter. The galaxy laughed at us once today. I've got a feeling it's about to make the same mistake twice. Mara stared at the dead field of frozen stone outside her mount, the 12,000 drifting shells, the wreck of a god, and she made herself breathe. How do you know that, Dev? She said. How do you know somebody owned it? Maybe it was just a monster. Maybe monsters just happen. Because I've built ships for 30 years, Dev said, and I've never once built one that nobody pointed. A thing that hunts gets hungry, and a hungry thing goes where the food is, and it doesn't care whose food. But the Reach didn't eat everybody. It ate the worlds that didn't pay, and it left the worlds that did. And that's not hunger, Mara. That's a leash. Hunger doesn't know the difference between a payer and a refuser. Only an owner knows the difference. Only an owner draws a line and says, eat on this side, and not on that one. His voice was grim. Somebody drew that line for 1,000 years. And right now they're sitting somewhere watching the line wash away, and they are very, very afraid. And afraid things with a lot of guns do exactly one thing. A pause. They come to put the line back. Mara reached for a fresh shell, and her hands were steadier than they had any right to be. Then let's be standing on the wrong side of it when they get here, she said. That's the spirit, said Dev Arno. Reload the gun. The masters of the Reach were called the Sable Hand, and they had never once shown themselves in 1,000 years, because a thing that owns a god does not need to be seen. Eshk knew the name the way you know a name you are not supposed to say. The bound tally had a ledger for the Sable Hand too, a thin one, locked, kept by clerks more senior than Eshk would ever be. The Sable Hand did not feed. The Sable Hand did not laugh. The Sable Hand grew the Reach in dark places, the way a farmer grows a crop, and pointed it at worlds that had something the Sable Hand wanted, and let it eat, and harvested what was left. The Reach had never been a god. The Reach had been a tool. And now, the tool was broken, and the farmers had come to see who had broken it. They came out of a fold in the dark that opened where no fold should open, a tear in the vacuum 40 light seconds wide, and through it came the true fleet, and Eshk understood at once that the devouring Reach had only ever been the thing the Sable Hand was willing to lose. 200 ships came through, only 200. But where the Reach had been 12,000 grown shells full of churning gut, these were built things, machined things, long and black and clean, bristling with weapons that were actually weapons, and each one of them was bigger than the whole of Tarn Reach Yard. They did not laugh. They did not transmit a feeding lesson to the watching platforms. They simply came through the tear in the dark, in a cold ordered line, and began, methodically, to power up weapons that could crack a planet. Eshk had never seen them before. No one had. The bound tally had no scans of Sable Hand ships in any of its open ledgers, because the Sable Hand had never let itself be scanned, because the Sable Hand did not fight. The Reach fought for it. But Eshk had read enough fleet geometry in his life to know fear when he saw it dressed up as power, and these ships, for all their size, for all their guns, were moving the way frightened things move. Too fast, too tight, too close together. They had come through the fold the instant the Reach died, which meant they had been waiting just behind the dark the whole time, watching, never expecting to be needed, and now they were needed and they did not know how to do it. They are afraid, Emor whistled, watching beside him. Look how they crowd. A fleet that has fought before does not crowd like that. They are afraid of the little gray ship, Eshka, 200 planet killers, and they are afraid of one breached and burning thing that should already be dead. Her tendrils curled. I have waited 200 years to see a master be afraid. I did not think I would live to see it. That's the rest, Mara breathed, watching the scan fill with 200 black contacts, each one an order of magnitude past anything the Reach had been. Dev, those aren't grown. Those are built. That's a real navy. We can't drill through 200 of those. They don't have a shared heart. They're separate ships. Every one of them's got its own. I know, Dev said. We killed the dog, Mara said, and she heard her own voice climb and made it stop. And now the owner's here, and the owner's got 200 real guns, and we've got one ship that just took everything we had to fight a thing that didn't even shoot back. Dev, what do we do? There was a silence on the channel, a long one, and then Dev Arno did something Mara had never once heard him do in 15 years of working under him. He laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised out of him, warm and tired and genuinely amused, and it ran out across the whole internal channel of the quiet furnace, so that 40 frightened fitters in 40 frightened gun mounts and reactor spaces heard their ordnance chief laughing at 200 planet killers, and the strangest thing happened. Some of them started laughing too, because the math was so funny. It had always been so funny. Mara, Dev said, when he could, do you know why the Sable Hand sent the Reach instead of coming themselves? For 1,000 years? Do you know why they grew a god to do their eating? Because, Mara stopped. Because they didn't want to risk their real fleet. Because they didn't want to risk their real fleet. Dev agreed. 200 ships, that's all they sent. 200. You know what that tells me? That tells me 200 is a lot to them. That tells me the Sable Hand is not a galaxy of warships, Mara. The Sable Hand is small. The Sable Hand is a few dark worlds that figured out, a long time ago, that if they grew one big scary monster, they'd never have to build a real navy, and they'd never have to fight a real war, because everyone would just kneel to the monster, and the Sable Hand could stay home, and stay rich, and stay safe. His voice hardened, and the amusement went out of it, and something else came in, something colder and older than amusement. They got soft. They've been hiding behind a dog for 1,000 years, and we just killed the dog. And now they've had to come out, in person, for the first time in 1,000 years, and they are about to find out that they forgot how to fight a long, long time ago. You sound awfully sure for a man with one breached ship and 6 rounds, Mara said. I'm a shipwright, Mara, Dev said. Being sure about how things are built is the entire job. I've spent 30 years looking at a hull and knowing, before I ever put a torque wrench on it, where it'll fail. And I've been looking at the Sable Hand for 90 seconds, and I already know where they'll fail, because they built themselves exactly the way they built their monster. One center, everything hanging off it. No redundancy, because redundancy is for people who expect to be hit, and they have not expected to be hit in 1,000 years. He breathed. A thing that's never been hit doesn't know where its own seams are. We do. We've been getting hit our whole lives. That's the difference, and it's the only difference that matters. That's 200 planet killers, Dev, Mara said. I don't care how soft they are. 200 guns is 200 guns, and we are one ship, and we are out of trick shots. Are we? Dev said. Holt. The spinal driver. How many rounds left? Mara checked. 4 drill rounds. 2 open rounds. 6 shots. Dev, 6 shots against 200 ships, even if I never miss. You won't need 200 shots, Dev said. You'll need 1, because those 200 ships have a master. The Sable Hand doesn't fly 200 ships, Mara. The Sable Hand sits in one. There's a flagship in that fold somewhere. The one the orders come from. The one with the actual masters aboard. The few soft, frightened old things that have run this whole part of the dark from behind a monster for 1,000 years. Find me that ship, and I'll have Holt put a drill round through it, all the way through, the same as we did the heart, and then we'll see how the other 199, like flying without anyone left to kneel to. On the watch platform 9th Vale, Eshk was already looking. He was a counter, and he had spent his whole life reading fleets, and he had access to the bound tally's deep scans, and he knew what a command ship looked like in a formation, even when it was trying not to look like one. He swept the scan across the 200 black hulls of the Sable Hand, looking for the one that the others were quietly ordering themselves around, the one held back, the one protected. He found it, 11th from the leading edge, slightly larger, wrapped in a tighter screen of escorts than any other, trailing a thin braid of command signal to every other ship in the formation, a braid so faint that only a clerk who had spent 30 years reading the cold geometry of fleets would have seen it. And Eshk, sub-coordinator of the bound tally, who had counted 40 billion dead off a green world and written the number down and been sick in a small room and never said a word against the thing that did it, made the second free choice of his life. He keyed his transmitter on the open channel, where the Sable Hand could hear him too, where it would know exactly who had betrayed it, and he sent the human ship a set of coordinates. Quiet furnace, he said, and his three hearts hammered, and for the first time in 1,000 years, he did not try to be small. This is Subcoordinator HFY, of the bound tally. The command ship is 11th from the leading edge. The braid of signal runs to it from all the others. I am sending you its position. The masters are aboard. The ones who grew the reach. The ones who fed it Sume. His voice broke, and he let it. End them, please. End them, and I will spend the rest of my life telling the truth about what they did, in every ledger I am ever allowed to touch. A pause on the open channel. Eshk, Dev Arno's voice, and it was gentle. Thank you. You've got a deal. Holt, you hear that? I heard it, Mara said. She was already hauling the spinal driver around, already feeding it a drill round, already lining the bow of the quiet furnace on the 11th ship from the leading edge of the cold black line. Charging now, 60%. 80. Dev, they see what I'm doing. The whole formation's moving to screen the command ship. They're putting hulls in the way. Then you put the drill round through the hulls in the way, Dev said. That's what it's for. It doesn't stop. Send it down the road. Sen, Dev said, on the open channel, steady as ever. I'm not going to lie to you. This next part is going to hurt. They've got real guns, and we've got real holes. And we're going to take fire we can't stop. I need you to keep the bulkheads sealing faster than they can open them. I need the reactor held, no matter what the boards say. And I need every one of you to remember one thing. A breath. We already did the impossible once today. We killed the thing that couldn't be killed. Everything after that is just arithmetic. And we are very, very good at arithmetic. Hold your stations. Trust the ship. Trust Holt's gun. Reactors held worse, came Saul Okafor's deep voice from the heart of the ship, unbothered. You point us, Chief. We'll get there. The sable hand opened fire. 200 planet killers fired on the single scarred gray ship at the center of the field of dead reach, and the dark between them filled with light, and the quiet furnace took the first volley on a flank that was already scorched and already breached, and the hull rang like a struck bell, and 3 more sections opened to vacuum, and somewhere a fitter Mara had worked beside for 10 years, stopped answering the damage board. But the quiet furnace did not stop. It had never once, in its whole short violent life, stopped. It drove forward through the volley, into the formation, bow lined on the 11th ship, and Mara Holt held the charge on the spinal driver at 100%, and waited for the road to clear. And the road would not clear, because the sable hand kept throwing hulls into the path, escort after escort interposing itself between the human gun and the masters it protected. They're stacking up in front of it, Mara said, tight. 3 hulls deep now. 4. Dev, if I fire, the drill round goes through all of them and still reaches the command ship. But the recoil at this range, on this charge, with the hull breached the way it is, it might take the bow. It might take us. The channel was quiet for a moment. The quiet furnace took another volley. Mara felt it through her boots, through her teeth, a long rolling shudder that ran the whole length of the hull, and a board in the mount beside her went dark and stayed dark. The ship was dying around her, section by section, and she knew it, the way you know a thing in your body before you let yourself know it in your head. They did not have many more volleys in them, maybe 2, maybe 1. Mara, Dev said, look out your sight, past the 4 ships in the way, at the command ship. Can you see it? Mara looked. Through the sight, past the stacked black escorts, she could just make out the 11th ship, larger, wrapped tight, and she imagined the soft, frightened old things aboard it, the masters who had grown a monster to do their killing for 1,000 years so they would never have to be brave, the ones who had eaten sume, and laughed and stayed home, and stayed safe, and stayed rich, watching now through their screens as a single shed-built warship drew a line on them and would not be turned. On the 9th Veil, Eshk watched the same picture, on a better scan, and he understood something that made his 3 hearts go cold and then, strangely, go calm. The sable hand was throwing its own ships in front of the human gun, its own ships. Crude ships, with crews aboard, beings who had served the masters their whole lives, and the masters were spending them like coins, stacking them up 4 deep between the gun and themselves, because to the masters, those crews had never been anything but a wall to hide behind. That was what the sable hand was. That was what it had always been. A few soft old things at the center, and everything else, the reach, the fleet, the crews, the 12 beaten species, all of it just wall, just shielding, just a thing to put between themselves and the dark so they would never have to feel it. And the humans were about to put a single shot through all of it. I see it, she said. For Sume, Dev said quietly. For the 40 billion. For every world that ever paid them, and every clerk who ever had to write the numbers down and stay silent. For the whole galaxy that they made kneel. A breath. Send it down the road, Fitter. All the way through. Mara Holt fired the gun she had built with her own 2 scarred hands. The drill round went down the road. It went through the first escort and out the far side without slowing. It went through the second the same way, and the third, and the fourth. 4 planet killers of the Sable Hand opened end to end like beads on a wire, and then it reached the 11th ship from the leading edge, the command ship, the one with the masters aboard, and it did not stop there either. It went through the heart of the Sable Hand, the way the first round had gone through the heart of the Reach, and the few soft old things that had ruled this part of the dark from behind a monster for 1,000 years had perhaps a quarter of a second to understand that the math had finally, after all this time, come due. The command ship came apart, and the braid of signal that Eshk had seen, the faint command thread that ran from the 11th ship to all the others, went dark, all at once, the way the Reach's shared hunger had gone dark, because the Sable Hand had made the same mistake their monster had made. They had built everything around one center. They had never imagined the center could be reached. For 1,000 years they had been so safe that they had forgotten that safe is a thing you have to keep earning, and the people who had come to remind them were 40 fitters in a shed-built ship who had never forgotten it for a single day. The recoil of the shot hit the quiet furnace like a god's fist. The breeched bow buckled. 2 more sections blew open. The whole ship rang and tumbled, and for 3 long seconds, Mara Holt was sure that Dev had been right, and the gun had taken them, that they had reached the heart of the Sable Hand and died doing it. And she found that she was at peace with it, because they had reached the heart, and that was the whole job. Then the tumble steadied, the reactor held. The lights, after a flicker, came back amber and then white, and the quiet furnace, scorched along every flank, holed in a dozen places, trailing air and light, came through the gap its own gun had blown in the Sable Hand, and out the other side, still flying, still alive. And the other 195 ships of the Sable Hand stopped. They did not flee, they did not regroup, they simply stopped, drifting, dark, their weapons powering down across the whole formation, because the thing that had told them what to do for 1,000 years was gone, and they did not know how to do anything else. The Sable Hand had ruled through one voice. They had crewed their warships with the kind of crews you can give to ships you never expect to fight, crews trained to obey a center and nothing else. And the center was a cloud of frozen wreckage drifting in the dark, and the crews, leaderless, masterless, woke up for the first time in their lives, with no one to kneel to, and no one to point them, and they did the only thing that made any sense. They surrendered, to 40 fitters, in a shed-built ship that should not have survived the first volley, let alone the last. On the watch platform 9th Vale, Sub-Coordinator Eshk watched 195 planet killers lower their weapons to a single burning gray ship, and he set down his stylus very carefully, because his hands were not steady enough to write, and he found that whatever his species did, instead of weeping, he was doing it. The open channel was silent for a long time. No one knew what to say. 1,000 years of silence does not break all at once. It breaks slowly, like ice, one crack at a time. The first voice across it was Dev Arno's, and it was barely a voice at all, hoarse and spent. "This is the quiet furnace," he said, "to the ships of the Sable Hand. We accept your surrender. You will hold position and power down all weapons. You will not be eaten. You will not be made into anything. That was never how we did things, and it never will be." A long breath. "You're going to be taken somewhere, and you're going to answer for Sume, and for every world your masters fed to their monster, in front of everyone, in the open, with all the numbers read out loud. That's not revenge. We don't do revenge either. That's just the truth, finally getting said out loud, after 1,000 years of nobody being allowed to say it." He paused. "Eshk," he said, "Sub-Coordinator Eshk, of the Bound Tally. You there?" Eshk fumbled for his transmitter. "I am here, Quiet Furnace. You gave us the command ship, Dev said. You did that on an open channel, where the Sable Hand could hear you do it, knowing what would happen to you if we'd missed. That took more guts than anything we did out here. We had a ship. You had a transmitter and 40 years of being afraid, and you used the transmitter anyway. A beat. You said you'd spend the rest of your life telling the truth about what they did. I'm going to hold you to it. The whole galaxy's going to need the numbers, and you're the one who knows where they're written. You up for it? Eshk looked around the watch platform, at the beaten counters of 12 species, all of them watching him, all of them waiting to see what a free clerk did with the first free moment any of them had ever been given. I am up for it, he said, and then, because it was true, and because no one would punish him for it anymore, I have been counting numbers I was not allowed to say for 40 years, Quiet Furnace. I would like, very much, to say them. Then start saying them, Dev said. Start with Sume. 40 billion. And don't stop until every world the Sable Hand ever fed to the Reach has its name and its number read back into the open, where it can never be hidden again. That's the only justice there is for the dead. Not getting them back. We can't get them back. Just refusing, forever, to let anyone pretend they didn't exist. And Eshka, sub-coordinator of the bound tally, third tier, a counter, and never a soldier, looked at his ledger plate, at the columns that had been locked his whole life, and he opened them, one by one, on the open channel, in front of 12 watching species, and he began to read the names of the dead worlds back into the light. It took him 11 days. The humans waited, the whole time, holding the surrendered fleet, in no hurry at all, because they understood that the reading was the most important thing that had happened in that part of the dark in 1,000 years. Inside the quiet furnace, Mara Holt finally let go of the gun. Her hands ached, her arms shook. The mount around her was scorched, and the air smelled of burned insulation, and her own fear, and when she finally unstrapped and floated free of the gun she had built, she found that she was crying, and that she did not particularly want to stop. She made her way forward through the breached, venting, half-dead hull of the ship she had helped build, past the damage board where Priya Sen was still working, past the section where a fitter she had known for 10 years had stopped answering and would not answer again, past the long gray spine of the quiet furnace, to the bow, where Dev Arno was. He was floating by the forward port, looking out at the field of dead Reach and the surrendered fleet of the Sable Hand and the small orange star and the work lights of Tarn Reach Yard, far off, still burning. He looked very old and very tired, and he did not turn around when she came in. We lost 4, he said quietly. Of the 40, Bell and Aaron and the Okafor brothers, he breathed. 4. I'd have told you, before today, that 4 out of 40 against 12,000 and then 200 was a number you'd take in a heartbeat. And it is. It is. I'd take it 100 times over. A pause. Doesn't make it small though, does it? No, Mara said. It doesn't. They floated there a while, the two of them, looking out at what they had done. Outside the forward port, the field of dead Reach stretched away into the dark, 12,000 drifting shells frozen around a small orange star, and beyond them, the long, cold line of the surrendered Sable Hand, 195 planet killers gone silent and obedient with no one left to obey. And beyond all of it, far out at the edges of the dark, the watch platforms of 12 beaten species, holding station, not leaving, because they could not yet make themselves believe what they had seen, and they did not want to look away, in case it stopped being true. You know what I keep thinking about? Dev said quietly. All those platforms out there, all those clerks, the Reach made them come and watch. It always did. That was the whole point of a feeding, for the Reach. It wasn't even really about the eating. The Reach could have eaten us in the dark, quiet, where nobody saw. It dragged 12 species out here on purpose, because the lesson was the point. Watch the soft, warm things get poured out. Watch and learn there's no use fighting. Watch and go home and keep paying, and keep kneeling, and keep your neighbors in line so the Reach never has to come for you. And instead, they watched us win, Mara said. Instead, they watched us win. Dev's not-quite smile got a little closer to being one. The Reach gathered its own witnesses. It built the audience that's going to spend the next 1,000 years telling every world in the dark exactly how the unkillable thing died. It set up the whole stage so it could teach a lesson, and then we taught a different one, and now there's no taking it back, because 12 species saw it with their own eyes. He shook his head slowly. That's the part the sable hand never understood about a witness. A witness only stays loyal as long as the thing it's watching keeps winning. The day it loses, every witness it ever made turns into a storyteller. And there is no weapon in the dark, none, that can outrun a story 12 species are all telling at once. Mara looked out at the platforms, at the small far lights of the clerks who had come to watch her die and stayed to watch her win, and she understood, for the first time, the true size of what the 40 of them had done. They had not just killed a monster. They had killed the lesson the monster taught, and that lesson had held a whole galaxy on its knees for 1,000 years, and it would never hold anyone again, because the people it was meant to frighten had all watched it break. You built a good gun, Mara, Dev said finally. It didn't come apart. It reached the heart twice, and it reached the masters once, and it didn't come apart. He turned, at last, and looked at her, and there was something in his face that was not quite a smile, but was on its way to becoming one. 200 years we've been building ships in this shed, quiet, off in the corner, where nobody looked. 200 years, and the whole time, the galaxy out there knelt to a monster and paid it tribute and laughed at anyone who wouldn't, and we just kept our heads down and built ships and never told anybody what they could do. Why? Mara asked. Why did we keep it quiet? Why didn't we ever? Because a furnace works best when nobody knows it's a furnace, Dev said. Because the day you show everyone your teeth is the day you've decided to use them, and we hoped we'd never have to. He looked back out at the dead Reach. The Reach decided for us. It came to our perch, and it laughed, and it called us a feeding. So we opened the furnace. That's all this was, Mara. Somebody finally made us open the furnace. And now everybody's seen what's inside it, and nobody's ever going to make that mistake again. Out on the 9th Veil, on the 9th day of his reading, Eshk reached the name of his own home reef, a small world called Tesh, that the Sable Hand had fed to the Reach 80 years before he was born. A world he had only ever known as a number in a locked column. A world he had never been allowed to say out loud. And he said it out loud, and its number, and he did not break, because saying it was not breaking. Saying it was the opposite of breaking. It was the thing the dead had been waiting 80 years for someone to do. In the spans between his readings, Eshk learned things about the humans that he wrote down with even more care than the numbers, because the things were stranger than the numbers, and harder to believe. He learned that the quiet furnace had not been finished when it flew, that the gun which had reached 2 hearts had never been test-fired, that the people aboard it were not soldiers, had never been soldiers, were fitters and welders and reactor hands who had spent their lives building ships for other people to crew, and who had climbed aboard a half-built warship and flown it into the unkillable thing because there had been no one else to do it, and the alternative was to be eaten. He learned that they had buried their 4 dead with the same quiet care they gave to everything, that they spoke the names of Bel and Aaron and the 2 Okafor brothers on the open channel once each day at the same hour, so the dead would be part of the record too, and that the man named Saul Okafor, who ran the reactor, spoke his own brothers' names in a steady voice every day and then went back to his work, because the work was how he carried them. And Eshk learned, slowly, over 11 days of listening, the thing that he came to think of as the true secret of the humans, the thing the Reach and the Sable Hand had never understood and could never have understood, because it could not be grown and it could not be owned. The humans were not strong because they were many. They had been 40 against 12,000 and then 40 against 200. They were not strong because they were unafraid. He had heard the fear in their voices the whole time, every one of them, all the way through. They were strong because not one of them, in the worst of it, had ever once thought that being afraid was a reason to kneel. That was all. That was the whole secret. The Reach had built 1,000 years of empire on the certain knowledge that fear meant surrender, and 40 frightened fitters in a shed-built ship had simply, quietly, declined to agree. When the reading was done, on the 11th day, the watching species did not go home. They had been ordered there by the Reach to watch a feeding, and they had stayed to watch a thing be born, and now that it was born, they did not want to leave it. 12 broken species, 12 fleets of clerks and counters, who had never made a free decision in 1,000 years, sat in the dark around a small orange star and a scarred gray ship and a field of dead stone, and one by one, on the open channel, they began to ask the humans the same question. It was Eshk who asked it first, because Eshk had earned the right. "Quiet furnace," he said. "Tarn Reach Yard. The Reach is dead. The sable hand is broken. But they were not the only monsters in the dark. There are others. There are always others, farther out, that grew the same way, that we paid the same way, that we knelt to the same way, because we did not know there was any other way to live." He paused. "You said when the Reach was dying, that the next thing that comes for any of us, we should call you, that you build ships. I am asking, on behalf of 12 species who have just watched you do the impossible twice in 11 days, when the next monster comes, will you build us ships? Will you teach us how to open our own furnaces? Will you show us how to stop kneeling?" The answer did not come from Dev Arno. It came from Mara Holt, because Dev had floated over and put his hand on the transmitter, and then, instead of speaking, had looked at the fitter who had built the gun that reached 2 hearts, and had nodded, and had pushed the transmitter gently toward her, and let her be the one. Mara Holt, fitter 3rd grade, Hull and Ordnance Division, who had spent 31 hours swearing at a bolt and had ended up killing a god, keyed the transmitter, and looked out at the watching dark, and gave the galaxy its answer. "This is the warship Quiet Furnace," she said. Her voice was rough and steady, and it did not shake at all. "And yeah, we'll build you ships. We'll build you 1,000 of them. We'll teach every one of you how to find the bolt that holds the monster together, and how to break it, and how to never ever kneel to a thing, just because it's big, and it's loud, and it laughs at you." She breathed. "Here's the only thing we ask. When we're done, when you've got your ships and your furnaces and your teeth, you don't become the next Reach. You don't grow a monster to do your killing for you. You don't make anybody kneel. You keep your heads down, and you build good things, quiet, off in the corner, where nobody looks. And you only ever open the furnace when something comes to your perch and laughs and calls you a feeding." She looked at Dev. Dev nodded, once. "That's the deal," Mara said. "The whole galaxy laughed at us today. At the math. 40 of us, 12,000 of it, and then 200 more. Real funny. And here, at last, after 11 days, the dry human edge came back into her voice, warm and tired and unbreakable. So here's the new math, and you can write it in whatever ledger you keep. 1 shed, 40 fitters. 1 ship we hadn't even named yet, and the unkillable thing, and its masters, and 1,000 years of everybody kneeling, all of it, gone, in 11 days. A pause. Go home and tell them that number, and the next time something big and loud comes over your horizon and laughs, you remember it. You remember exactly how loud we laughed back. On the 9th veil, Sub-Coordinator Eshk picked up his stylus, and on a fresh page of his ledger, at the top, where the most important entries went, he wrote the new number down. 1 shed, 40 fitters, 1 unnamed ship, 11 days. Then, underneath it, in the careful hand of a counter, who would spend the rest of his long free life making sure no one was ever allowed to forget, he wrote the name of the ship, so that it would be in the ledger forever, so that every species that ever read the ledger would know exactly what had come to the edge of the dark in a half-finished shipyard and refused to kneel. "Quiet Furnace," he wrote, and then, because it was the truest thing he had ever written, and because the galaxy had finally learned to count it, he wrote 1 line more. It came quiet. It did not stay quiet, and when it was done, the laughing stopped. Years later, when the dark had changed past all recognition, when 12 freed species crewed their own quiet furnaces, and the word tribute had become a thing the young ones had to be taught the meaning of, the historians of 100 worlds would argue about which moment the old order truly ended. Some said it was the first shot, the drill round through the heart. Some said it was the second, the round that opened the Reach from the inside. Some said it was the shot that took the Sable Hand's command ship, 4 planet killers and the masters all on 1 wire. But Eshkuk, who lived to be very old and who never once stopped telling the truth in every ledger he was given, always said it was none of those. He said it was a small thing, a thing the scans had not even recorded, a thing he had only heard because his transmitter happened to be open at the right moment. It was the sound, in the middle of the worst of it, with 12,000 mouths laughing and the whole galaxy certain of how it would end, of a tired human voice on a half-built ship saying, "Real funny," and meaning it, and getting ready to laugh back. That, Eschk wrote, in the last and most read of all his ledgers, was the moment the dark stopped belonging to the monsters. Not a weapon, a refusal. The simple human refusal to find the math frightening, when the math said, "Kneel." The quiet furnace turned, scorched and holed and burning, and utterly, gloriously alive, and limped home toward the worklights of Tarn Reach Yard, where 410 human beings were already waiting in the docks, with welding torches and spare plate and fresh paint, ready to put their ship back together, ready to build 1,000 more, ready, the next time the galaxy laughed, to speak again in fire.